Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Dr. Swope again. And this is the last day of our kind of review, our instruction. Of course, next week we have the prep week, and we'll talk more about that as we go through today. But again, I want to congratulate you on making it through a pretty long April. And I think everyone would agree that this has probably been the longest April in the history of all Aprils. But hey, let's proceed on with our review of psychology, okay? So here's what we're going to do today. Today is all about social psychology. Now, we only have 3 bullet points, but as you know, the number of bullet points doesn't necessarily mean the length of today's presentation. This is going to be a fun one today. This social psych is probably my favorite and a lot of people's favorite unit because oftentimes we can think of social psychology as like holding a mirror up to ourselves. We can see ourselves because, we're almost never alone. We're social creatures. And so how do we react differently in different social situations? And so that's what we're going to dig into today. Hopefully you'll like it. We got some pretty cool examples for us. All right. So you know that yesterday we had homework. Let's dig into that. James Schmidlap, the father of the Schmidlap clan, is watching his children grow. He marvels at how they seem so different despite the fact of them being similarly raised by his wife and himself. He believes that his wife and he raised them each consistently and fairly, yet he still marvels at the difference between the 5 children. Please explain how the following terms might result in differences or perceived differences in the children's personalities. And of course, we got 4 words, okay? And again, we're hoping that you timed yourself. And then after, from now on, and we'll talk more about it in practice week, when you do a practice question, even if it's by yourself or something your teacher gives you, do your question with the timer, and then what I want you to do is practice uploading it. Just email it to yourself. Get in the habit of after you write the final word, what are you going to do with that file? Save it, upload it, copy it. You know what to do. Okay, so conscientiousness is a trait of the Big Five personality trait theory that measures how detail oriented a person is. For instance, a person who scores high in conscientiousness might double and triple check their homework before turning it in. This could result in differences between the children because one child might score higher and lower than his sibling. A score on a personality test might not necessarily matter to the father, but he might see the different behavior when it comes to task completion. So we've defined it and we've applied it. Okay. We're going to define observer bias. It's the tendency for the observer to not accurately perceive the occurrence in a given situation. And theoretically, we're all biased observers, right? This could be caused by many factors, such as, and here's some vocabulary words and synonyms that's going to help you out: framing effect, confirmation bias, cultural expectations, and mental set. So, the father could wrongly perceive differences in personality between his son and daughter because of his biased gender expectations. For example, if they both did the same behavior, such as helping with the chores, he might think she is sweet and conscientious, where he might think the son was being clever and up to something. Okay. Reciprocal determination means the factors such as behavior and environment reciprocate or give back to each other. All right, quick timeout. If you've never heard the word reciprocate, it's a verb meaning to give back and forth. So maybe that will help you understand that concept. For example, fearful behavior in a social setting would create a tense situation that might then contribute to more fear and fearful behavior. For example, this could result in personality differences between the child because one child might be in a different grade and exposed to different settings. So he might act differently at home. This different behavior might change the home environment. He would then react to the change in the new home environment, which would be perceived as a different personality. Okay. And inferiority complex is a part of Alfred Adler's idea on the unconscious struggle for superiority. Because it's unconscious, a person might not know why they work so hard to achieve a goal. It might be to overcome unconscious feelings of failure they felt as a child. So the father might perceive differences in his children's personality because he might be unaware that his view of his children is affected by his own unconscious struggle with feelings of failure. Thus, anything he notices might not be due to actual differences, but how he sees his children through his own unconscious lens. And again, Alfred Adler's neo-Freudian and unconscious. So I hope what you wrote matched up with what I wrote. And if you came at, you defined it hopefully similarly, but if you applied it differently, that's fine. You can really engage in a little bit of creative writing, however you want to apply it. Just remember, did you demonstrate to the human being? It's important to know human beings read this, and did you demonstrate to them that you know what you're talking about? Okay. So that next week we got a pretty special week lined up. Let me give you the lineup. So Monday, we're going to have chief readers Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Then we have some special and notable researchers, psychological kind of celebrities and rock stars are going to join us next week. So Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, memory fallibility, eyewitness testimony, and you hate to reduce someone's whole career to a vocabulary word. Dr. Loftus and Dr. Steele are both going to join us a week from today, next Friday. And Dr. Steele is known for stereotype threat. And again, he has a wide and broad distinguished career. We don't want to reduce his career to one vocabulary word, but that's probably what you're familiar with him about. And then Dr. Duckworth is going to join us next Tuesday. So we've got a lot of really good things coming our way to help launch you guys, get you ready and excited and encouraged for your AP exam coming up on May 19th. Again, we ask you to give us some questions. We're getting a lot of questions. I'll get to a couple of them today. So submit your questions to ask Nancy and Joe, and of course, ask Dr. Loftus, Dr. Duckworth, Dr. Steele. We will pass on your questions to them. Okay, we also have special guests. Like I mentioned before, we have 3 chief readers, and we talked a bit about what a chief reader is. It's once the reading starts, and the reading is when you get hundreds of some of the best AP psychology teachers and college professors together. They're going to read all of the responses in a systematic, reliable, and valid way so that everyone gets fair treatment. It's an amazing undertaking, and the chief readers are going to give us kind of behind the scenes peek at how they did it, what they're going to do, what can we expect this year. And College Board Representative Dr. Feinberg is going to join Dr. Duckworth on Tuesday and kind of explain a little bit of behind the scenes with College Board and some tips and tricks and maybe help you guys out a little bit. So we got a big week next week, even though today's our last kind of official review. Okay, on to social psychology, which I mentioned before is kind of my favorite thing. And a lot of students say, and a lot of teachers say it's their favorite stuff too. What we want to do is discuss attitude change, including persuasion strategies and cognitive dissonance. And despite, College Board says, well, let's discuss attitude change. Look what I put. Very first thing, I think it's very difficult, almost impossible to change someone's attitude. You don't believe me? Well, if you're watching this, you're probably a 16-year-old teenager, maybe 17, maybe 15, and you've probably gotten a lecture. You've probably gotten a bunch of lectures, and maybe the lecture's similar, like, you're not living up to your potential, or respect, or we need you to pitch in around the house, over and over the same kind of themes. And I ask you, has there ever been a lecture ever given to a teenager that made a difference? No. Maybe the teenagers at the time will feel ashamed, embarrassed, and pretend like they're really, really sorry and they're going to change. But I don't think lectures have ever worked, ever. What about I can almost imagine, a whole bunch of teenagers nodding their head or rolling their eyes. What about political discussions? Have you ever out-argued someone and they said, oh, well, thank you for pointing out the error of my ways. I was wrong. No, I don't think attitude change. It's very difficult to do. So how can we talk about it? Well, let's look at the next couple slides. And not only are we going to look at what I'm going to say, we're going to review some of the key research in social psychology that showed conformity and attitude change. Okay, firstly, this is not a how-to on kind of using social psychology to manipulate people or start a cult. That is not what we're going to be here. Okay, so please, I hope you don't take notes on this. And secondly, this is for academic uses only. We are not trying to manipulate or change someone's attitude, especially your siblings, parents, or worse, your high school teachers. You're going to take care of them and not use what you learn here today. Okay, so let's look at some of the key contributions of researchers in the areas of conformity, compliance, obedience, and attitude change. So social psychology, I'm going to try to blend a lot of these concepts together and not just give you a list of vocabulary words, because now that I've started this, and hopefully you're at least a little bit interested, everything we're going to talk about today isn't going to be on, if you notice, it's not going to be on the AP exam. This is one of the units that was, for lack of a better word, cut out because many of the school years were cut short due to COVID-19. So why are we talking about it? Well, if you're in an AP psychology class, you need to be exposed, or you are taking an introductory college class, and standard in an introductory college class is social psychology. So we don't want to let COVID-19 just kind of run our lives. We're going to say, hey, if we're in an AP psychology class, we're covering social psych. One day is not how we want to do it, but at least we'll get you a little taste, kind of a little appetizer, and hopefully you can dig in and enjoy it and pursue it more. Okay, well, let's talk about Leon Festinger, my favorite psychologist, and he's actually the fifth most cited psychologist in the 20th century. Why do I bring this up? Because you've probably heard of cognitive dissonance theory before. I know Mrs. Fenton talked about it in the motivation unit. And the thing you need to know is that this cognitive dissonance is very easy to see in our daily lives. Once you kind of notice it, you see it almost every day. And it's the idea your thoughts kind of conflict. Dissonance means it's the opposite of harmony. So cognitive harmony means your thoughts agree. Cognitive dissonance means your behavior and your thoughts are kind of conflicting with each other and brings this anxiety, brings this stress and guilt. So that means that dissonance is bad, and we are motivated to reduce dissonance. And that's what Mrs. Fenton talked about a couple days ago. So imagine this then: if we have two things, like you really want to get an A, so you cheated, but you know cheating's bad. Now you're in turmoil. You know cheating's bad, but you did it anyway. How are you going to get rid of that? Well, you can't change the fact that you cheated. So what are you going to do? You're going to change the fact you think it's bad. You're going to justify and say, oh, it's just a quiz. No big deal. Everyone does it. The teacher was unfair. And you're going to rewrite your own thought process to get rid of the dissonance. And once you realize cheating wasn't bad, then you don't have that troubling dissonance thought. You can't change what you did. I mean, if you cheated on a test, you can't change that. If you ran a red light, you can't change it. So what are you going to do? You're going to change the thought it was bad. Oh, well, I usually stop for a red light. I was in a hurry. Everyone does it. You're going to come up with a whole bunch of reasons after the fact. And that's going to be important. Notice your attitude changes after you do the behavior. That's going to be our theme today. So look at some common justification techniques. It doesn't matter anyway. I didn't even want it. No big deal. And we call this the self-consistency bias. We all have this. So if you wanted to get an A or you wanted to get in a certain college and you didn't get in there, well, that's going to be dissonant. You wanted it, but you didn't get it. So what are you going to do? You can't change the fact you didn't get it. So you can change the fact you never wanted it. And you're going to rewrite in your own mind, I never wanted that's dumb college anyway. We do this all the time. It's not just adults, it's teenagers, especially adults. Ask your parents how they were as teenagers, especially after they just scolded you. They're going to then rewrite in their own mind, well, I wouldn't have talked to my parents that way when I was growing up. You really think teenagers in early generations were better? It's just they're kind of remembering, they're restructuring their attitude after they've already done a bunch of behaviors. Okay, here's an important concept. We said changing someone's attitude is tough, and confident people don't change their mind. Okay, it's a wild thing. You got to make someone a little emotionally off balance. And again, this is not kind of a how-to manual on how to manipulate people. To change someone's mind, first you need to make them emotionally uncomfortable. You've got to introduce cognitive dissonance. Maybe you say, and car dealers might do this all the time. They say, well, do you want to save money or do you want to have a safe car? You want both, but see, they're masters at making you choose. And once you choose one, that's a behavior. And then you're going to then justify what you chose. And oftentimes they're going to say, do you want or fear something? Okay. I said car dealerships are masters at persuasion. One of the first things they do is they make you feel a little uncomfortable because you're on their turf. They're experts at this. Most of us only buy a car once every couple of years and we're scared because we don't know what we're doing. We think we're getting taken advantage of, and debt and financing and all sorts of stuff. They do this every day. And so they're going to use some interesting persuasive techniques. And one of the first things they're going to do is, remember that word reciprocal? Well, they're going to give us a favor. Hey, why don't we take a test drive? Hey, you and me are friends, right? And once they give you something, you can't accept a gift. That's a behavior. And then be rude to them. So what they're going to do is start to persuade you using this idea of making you slightly emotionally uncomfortable. And adolescence and peer pressure. When you're in I'm not talking to you, but if an adolescent is in a situation where a lot of people are doing something they shouldn't be, that's tough. You shouldn't do it, but you want the emotional fulfillment, the popularity, you want to fit in, or maybe that person's really hot and attractive and you want to impress them or whatever. You got this dissonance. So notice you only get into trouble when you're emotionally unstable. Okay. To change someone's mind, first you need to change their behavior. Okay. What you can do is bribe, force, or guilt someone into doing something. And once they do it, then they're going to self-consistently find a reason why what they did was something they always wanted to do. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've got this huge high school, the Wilhelm Wundt High School, and a bunch of students are struggling in a class. So the AP psychology teacher in that class says, I'll tell you what, guys, I'm going to give you a bunch of extra credit, but you got to pay for it. every day after school, I want you to clean up one of the hallways. Maybe we'll do this every day. Everyone's going to have every week. Everyone's going to have a certain week, and for that week, Monday through Friday, you got to sweep the hall, pick up all the trash, and make it look nice. Students groan, "Oh, not our job. I don't care. This is stupid. I just want my grade." And they're moaning and groaning. Teacher bribes them and says, "If you do it, you will get a good grade." Notice they don't want to do it, but they're emotionally unstable. They want something. Teacher takes advantage of that. Says, clean up the hallway every day for a week, and I'll give you extra credit. So imagine one day on Monday, student comes out in the hallway and he's or she is sweeping the floor. She's embarrassed. She doesn't want to do it. She's mumbling or grumbling, but she has to do it because she's forced to. Okay. Next day, Tuesday, she's doing it. Now that she's done it, she's a little more comfortable. She's gotten over the first nerves or embarrassment or whatever. Wednesday, she's doing it, man. She's got the broom one-handed. She's just sweeping that floor, right? Thursday, she actually takes pride in it. She did it pretty fast. It looks pretty good. Friday, she did it. She swept the floor, picked up the trash, and then right as she's about to put away the broom and the dustpan and the trash can, and right as she's done with her job, she sees the far end of the hallway she just swept. Some person's eating chips and just throws the bag down. What do you think that student's going to think? They're going to be mad. Notice they're mad at the dirty floor after they swept it. See, the attitude change about caring about the dirty floor only happened after they did the behavior. So attitude change happens after behavior. That's kind of the lesson here today. And this is my quick ABC for it. If we're going to change someone's attitude, first we change the affect. What the heck does that mean? Affect means emotion. Think of the word affection. Maybe you've heard of the vocabulary term flat affect. That's a symptom of many mental illnesses. So some folks who are struggling with major depressive disorder have flat affect. They don't show appropriate emotional responses. So think of the word affect as emotion. Behavior is behavior. Cognition is attitude. So if you're going to change someone's thoughts, first, they've got to be emotionally uncomfortable. Give them a little cognitive dissonance. You could say, "Mom, do you trust me?" And then she'll say, "Well, of course, honey." Then here's where it's ready. "Well, if you trust me, then can I have a longer curfew?" And she said she trusts you, which now she can't go back on. That's you're creating dissonance in her. Well, and it's an uncomfortable, not altogether nice thing to do to someone, right? So once you make them a little bit uncomfortable, what they want or fear, then you get them to do a behavior. It might be a small behavior. We call that foot in the door. And if you're taking notes, foot in the door means once you get someone to agree to do something, that's a behavior. And then in their mind, they're going to figure out, well, I did that behavior. I always wanted to do that behavior. Of course, no big deal. I just did that behavior. Then you get them to do another one, and you get them to do another one. A pattern of behavior, you can't do something for long and hate it. Once you do something, you're going to find a reason that you wanted to do it. That's called the self-consistency bias. So once you get someone to start doing you favors bigger and bigger and bigger, what they're going to do is they're going to change their attitude that they always want to do that behavior. Okay. So that's kind of the pattern, the ABC of attitude change. All right. And let's hope that, there we go. Okay. There we go. We're going to look at more key researchers in conformity, compliance, and obedience. And you can see what that attitude changes. You can see how it overlaps conformity, compliance, and obedience. Compliance is maybe you force someone because they need a grade, they need a raise, or they don't want to get in trouble. So you make them do a behavior they didn't want to. That's called compliance. And then what's going to happen is once they accept that their behavior was something they want to do, it's kind of like conformity. So these terms overlap. Solomon Asch-line experiment. What he would do is he'd get one participant and 4 or maybe 5 what are called confederates. These are people that are in on the gag, the joke, the trick, or for lack of a better word, the prank. So they're sitting around a table and they have to give responses about matching lengths of line. And what's going to happen is everyone's going to give the same length. They say, is line X the same as line A? And everyone says, yes. Is line X the same as line B? Everyone says, yes, yes. And this goes on for a while, but eventually the confederates, the people who are in on the gag, are going to give a wrong answer. And the participant's going to look like, wait a minute, that's not the right answer. But it's very difficult to stand up to a group. So what you're going to do is Solomon Asch would say to the participants, of the standard line, which one, 1, 2, and 3, is most similar in length to the standard line? And for the first couple trials, people are going to say 2, 2, 2, 2. And they keep switching the cards and the lines vary. Eventually, the confederates are going to say, well, line 1. And the participant might be like, wait, what? Now, A lot of us think we could stand up to social pressure. Like, no way, you can't get me to bend what I know is right. I'll always stand up. Well, we're social creatures. And history has taught us most of the time, even though we're not supposed to admit this, most of the time it's actually smart to go along with the group. Sometimes it's not. And you got to know the difference. That's the trick. But so Solomon Asch is kind of one of the first to prove how powerful and how easy conformity can be to induce into a group. The magic number seems to be about 4 or 5 people. Okay, it's hard to argue with a group that's larger than that. Stanley Milgram is also kind of related to this idea of social psychology, conformity, compliance, and obedience. Stanley Milgram is known for his obedience experiments, and you've probably heard about him. There's been a couple, redo Hollywood-esque movies of this. Some of them have been good, some of them bad. I'm not going to endorse them, of course. What Milgram did is he deceived participants, just like Asch did. Remember, Solomon Asch had 4 or 5 people who were actors playing a prank, and you're engaging in deception, which again might have some ethical considerations. Are you allowed to lie to someone who trusted you and volunteered for your experiment? Well, he deceived participants into thinking they were actually giving electrical shocks to other volunteer participants. Really, what Milgram did is he was in a tangential way, trying to figure out how can average people in Nazi Germany, how can they obey orders? How can they be so obedient and just kill random strangers? How is that possible? And so Milgram's efforts were kind of trying to unpeel, like what just happened there? So he set up these obedience experiments, and notice it's a single blind because deception's involved. He had what's called a teacher. The teacher is the volunteer. And he said, you're going to be a teacher. And every time the learner gets something wrong, I want you to give him an electric shock. Well, the learner was also a Confederate. The learner was in on the gag. Nobody was getting shocked. Okay. But that doesn't mean someone wasn't harmed, because there's emotional and psychological harm that can be every bit, if not more painful than physical. So E stands for the experimenter, which would be Milgram. T is the teacher. That's the real volunteer, the real participant. L is the learner, and the learner is in on the gag, in on the joke with Milgram and the experimenter. So teacher says, I'm going to give you a word, and you have to give me the correct response. I think the joke, the deception was, it was a memory task. You have to memorize sets of words. And whenever the learner would get something wrong, the teacher would give a shock, and they would scream. Well, they wouldn't scream at first. I think it started at 10 volts first and went all the way to 450 volts. And what Milgram did is he set up such a powerful social situation that people really believed they were shocking another human being. Think this through. If someone told you, hey, see that person you've never met? I want you to slowly electrocute them. Most of us like, no way, that's disgusting. Ew, no, human beings, we can't do that. You can't harm people. But what Milgram found, ready, and this is scary, 65% of the people continued to give electrical shocks to someone, even to the point of death. And if you look at this curve, 100% of the people gave slight electric shocks. Eventually, some people said no way. But 65% went right to what's called the death zone. Think this through. Now, here's where the harm happened. Imagine you volunteer. You're, walking around New Haven, Connecticut. It started at Yale University, and you volunteered. Like, sure, I'll help science out. And then over a half hour, what you think happened is you slowly electrocuted a stranger to death, even though they're begging, even though they're saying, I have a heart condition, please let me out of here. That's going to cause severe cognitive dissonance and emotional stress. You think you're a good person, but you just found out you could shock someone to death just because you were told to. How do you reconcile those two things? And that's why we say people, could have been emotionally harmed, because what Milgram didn't do is take into account the emotional harm that he is pointing out to people. Yeah, you just harmed someone. And what's interesting is I don't know, I think the statistic, and I got to check on this, it should be before I started this, I don't know that anyone checked on the health of the victim. They just kind of walked out in the daze thinking, what just happened? Okay. Now, quick disclaimer. It has been discussed that some of the results might have been tainted to what's called demand characteristics. Were what's called the teachers, the one who were pressing the button, who thought they were shocking other people, did they really think they were shocking someone to death, or were they acting because they knew they were in an experiment where they were supposed to shock someone? And so there might be a confounding variable in there. But in any case, the important thing to take away from this is we are surprisingly willing to obey an authority figure, especially if they hold our paycheck, especially if they have a uniform. Imagine someone with a police uniform, even someone with a construction uniform and a hard hat and a reflective vest tells you to turn your car around, you'll do it. It's an interesting concept. If you were walking around the grocery store or whatever, and someone came behind you with the scale and said, "Hey, can you take off your clothes and get on the scale?" Like, oh no, call the cops. What's wrong with you? But if you're in a doctor's office, someone says, "Take off your clothes and jump on the scale," you do it. It's an interesting concept. A social situation with authority figures will get us to change our attitude, conform and obey, or obey and conform. And the two things happen kind of, the more you conform, the more you obey, the more you obey, the more you conform. Okay, you can't really talk about conformity without the Stanford prison experiment. It wasn't really a true experiment, but you need to know the name Philip Zimbardo. One more time, he created a realistic social situation, just as Milgram did with the obedience, just as Solomon Asch did with the lines. The more powerful the social situation, the harder it is to resist the group and social pressure. He created a realistic false prison in the basement of the campus building at Stanford. He got 24 people, and you know the vocabulary word, random assignment. So we put 12 in one group, 12 in the other, prison guards and prisoner. And the question is, would the average, whatever that is, college-aged male conform to the role of a prison guard or prisoner? And what he found was average people would conform to be sadistic, mean, evil prison guards, and average people, even after a short time, would conform and be meek, obedient, and submissive prisoners who instantly conformed and adopted the mentality of a prisoner. It was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but people ended up conforming to the role so quickly and so thoroughly, especially the prisoners, right? The experiment was ended quickly, maybe after a couple of days. The experiment was ended for the health, mental health of the participants. And we've got a lot of vocabulary there that we've already talked about. Informed consent. If you were told that you're going to be put in a stressful situation, maybe you're not going to act, as you normally would, but if that's going to ruin the study. So you're going to have to be deceived so you don't get informed consent. Well-being of the participants. Some people had some pretty tough emotional breakdowns. This was not a pleasant, this is not a bright spot on the history of psychology. And then I don't know, if Dr. Zimbardo went through an institutional review board at Stanford University before he pulled this. In retrospect, looking back on this almost 50 years ago, it looked really reckless. So notice my asterisk here. It has been revealed that some of the volunteers, I think it was the prison guards, were coached to act more extreme than they normally would. You can imagine some of the volunteers like, I don't really want to yell at this prisoner. It's just an act. I don't really want to do it. Well, they really coached up the prison guards to be more tough, more strict, more yelling, but the prisoners did conform quickly and thoroughly, so much so they had to quickly get rid or stop this quote experiment. It was more of a study, not a true experiment. Okay, notice that, and here's our ABC again. Notice that for all of these, the Asch, the Milgram, and the Zimbardo study, the Asch-line, Milgram obedient, Zimbardo prison study, first, the prisoners and guards were made to feel uncomfortable. That's our A. Okay, that's your affect. B, then they were forced to do something. Okay. And then C, once they did it, they mentally adopted to the role and behavior and said, well, I wanted to do it anyway. Okay. And there's a quick picture of some of that. And I think you've seen it again. There's some pretty bad, I shouldn't say that. Hollywood will probably sue me. Hollywood remakes of this particular study anyway. It is common to wonder, what would I do in that situation? Would I be one of the people who didn't shock someone to death? Would I be one of the people to stand up and say, no, you guys are wrong. That line is not that long. If you were put in this role of a prisoner, would you say, hey, guys, what are you talking about? We're just volunteered. We're getting paid, aren't we? Why are you taking it so seriously? Or would you conform? Statistically, we would all conform. Okay. Social psychology is about people in groups. It's about social. So obviously, how do we react when we're in groups? The quick, broad category is diffusion of responsibility. That means when we're in a group, oftentimes we don't feel as if we're responsible. It's kind of the group's problem. It's the group's fault, So There's a couple vocabulary words under the concept of diffusion of responsibility: de-individuation, bystander effect, social loafing, groupthink. Let's go through all these super quickly, okay? De-individuation is a temporary loss of self-awareness due to being part of a group. Okay, words, words, words. Let's see if we can give you an example. People in small towns aren't nicer. It's a myth, people in small towns are nicer and people in big cities are meaner. Not really. People in big cities are anonymous, so they can get away with bad behavior. The idea in a small town where everyone knows your name is you're going to act nice because you don't want to get public shaming or have your parents called or something like that. Crowds in sporting events. I would bet most of us have been at a sporting event and yelled horrible things to the referee. Why? Because A, we don't see the referee as a person. They're a uniform, they're an object. And B, we're in a crowd. It's not us. We can't identify. It's not us as a human being. It's one of the, face painted t-shirt wearing people who scream and yell horrible things. And that only happens when you're kind of diffusion responsibility. De-individuation means you're not individually responsible. Reckless driving. If you've ever driven recklessly or cut someone off, it's because you feel anonymous. You feel empowered. It's not you. It's just this car thing. And anonymous posting, and people, obviously, we don't have to talk about social media and some of the nonsense that's been done on cyberbullying. Okay, bystander effect is the tendency for strangers not to help a person. This is critical. People are not bad or evil. There's actually evidence most people are kind of biased towards helping, towards goodness. So why don't they help when they see a stranger in need? It's not their role. It's someone else's job. If I pass a car that's broken down, well, I'm thinking in my mind, don't they have a cell phone? That's what tow trucks are for. It's not my job. I'm a high school teacher. What the heck do I know about fixing a car? So not only is it not my job, I don't know what to do. If I see someone laying on the sidewalk, I'm not a paramedic. So it's those kind of things. And it doesn't mean I'm bad, weak, or evil. And same with anyone else who doesn't help. It's just we don't know what to do. So that's called the bystander effect. And the phrase is, if nobody stops to help, nobody will stop to help. But if one person stops to help, a lot of people will stop to help. It just takes that one person to stand up and break that social pressure. And even people, imagine someone's laying on the sidewalk and people walk around them and don't help, that forms a little group. And if you watch a group of strangers not doing something, well, you're a stranger and you're part of that group. You're not going to do anything either. Social loafing. Pretty self-explanatory. The tendency for people to contribute less to a shared task because they assume others will do more of the work. You know what I'm going to say to this? Pretty much every group project that's ever happened in high school and beyond. A lot of people will slack off because A, they didn't want the project. They didn't volunteer. The teacher said, here, you're going to do a group project. And by the way, here are your group members. And oftentimes that creates a lot of, for lack of a better word, lack of ownership. None of the students go, I don't want this. I don't like the people. I didn't choose it. Let someone else deal with it. And that happens, as you know, probably way too often, right? Groupthink. The process and the result of group members agreeing with each other and excluding information that doesn't support the group. Basically means the group maintaining harmony and excluding any information that might make the group uncomfortable. Because if someone brings in information that might make them uncomfortable, you're going to get cognitive dissonance. And you avoid that by ignoring information. Groupthink. Group polarization is when members consistently agree with each other. Okay, this is group polarization to prove they're loyal members. And the idea is, if you're a group of people, we're going to use Democrats and Republicans. If you're a Democrat, what you're going to do is you're going to always agree with the Democratic caucus, because that's going to make you seem like a loyal Democrat. Same thing on the Republican side. But what's going to be interesting is also the more you agree, well, then you're more Democratic than everyone else. And then someone's going to say, I don't want that person to have more standing in the group. I'm going to agree more often. And so you almost get this fight within the group to see who can be a more pure version of a group member. And so the group becomes really a crystallized version of themselves. And that's group polarization. Group polarization is when the group becomes an extreme version of itself. And what happens is now, in our political landscape, you have extreme and extreme, and we don't have too many people in the middle, because if you're in the middle, maybe you're a traitor. Maybe you're not one of us. And are you one of us? You better agree with everything we think. And it's a problem. We see this a lot. Okay. So groupthink and group polarization. Just world phenomenon. This is a false belief we all need to be careful of. And please be aware, just because I'm a psychology teacher, or if you ever take a class when you get to college in social psychology, just because you know some of these concepts doesn't mean you don't fall victim to them. So we have to be on guard about, bystander effect. Are we helping people? Just world phenomenon. And that means victim blaming. It's a false belief that the world is fair and people get what they deserve. So if we see something bad happen to another person, maybe in another state, another neighborhood, whatever else, we're going to think, well, they kind of deserved it. If they hadn't have been there, that wouldn't happen. Maybe if they hadn't dressed like that, maybe if they haven't driven that way, maybe if they would have saved their money or worked harder, those bad things wouldn't have happened to them. This allows us to not help, but still feel good about ourselves. Because look, if we're good people, we should help. And if we're good people and we don't help, that's cognitive dissonance. But watch what happens. We're good people and we don't help because they didn't deserve it. The world's fair. Something about their behavior brought that on. We should let that play out. It's not our business. This, again, like I said, prevents cognitive dissonance. We are told as children that good boys and girls get rewards and bad ones get punished. So if someone's getting punished by life or circumstance or situation, well, on some level, we're like, well, they probably deserve it. Karma. So if someone's suffering, we unconsciously think it's their fault. This is almost a mental protection. It allows us to believe we are safe. If we think bad things can happen to them and they're just like us, see, we don't want to think they're just like us. We want to think they're them. They're the out group. They're different. And that's why bad things happen to them. Okay, question for you. Is it better to compete or cooperate? Okay, well, it depends. And then your question is, well, it depends on what, right? Well, actually, there's a subsection of psychology dedicated to this question. This is where psychology and economics overlap, and psychology and economics are actually really close cousins of the social sciences, right? So let's talk about the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine you and your friend Billy Joe Schmidlap. If you don't know, Billy Joe's always the troublemaker of the clan. So Billy Joe Schmidlap are caught stealing blenders. I don't know, maybe they have a smoothie addiction or something like that. But the police don't have all the facts. They put you two in different rooms and offer you a deal. Okay, and here's the deal. Ready? If you confess and Billy Joe confesses, you both are going to get 2 years. Maybe you're stealing a lot of blenders. I don't know. However, if you confess and Billy Joe doesn't confess, you get 1 year. See, it might pay to be a rat, right? On the other hand, if you don't confess and Billy Joe, what he does is he just says, he just roll over and he snitches on you, you're going to get 5 years. If you don't confess and Billy Joe doesn't confess, you both go free, but you don't know. What do you do? Do you trust? Do you not? Okay. And this is a hypothetical. If you were to find out the right answer, there's way too many variables we would need to know to program through in a mathematical model to find out exactly when you should cooperate or compete. And you can see how this would have implications for trade dealings, international trade, or even with your brothers and sisters. Are you going to trust them? If you do them a favor, are they going to do you a favor? But if you don't do them a favor, they won't do you and you both lose. So what do you do, right? So it's kind of trust or compete. This brings us to something called the social trap. And this is when competitors focus on short-term self-benefiting goals, then end up with less than they would if they would have just compromised and cooperated. So imagine your sister, you're really mad at your sister, and she asks you for a favor. If you say no, it might feel good in the short term. You stuck it to her, you got her back, right? But you then won't have a favor coming to you. Should you swallow your short-term goals and your pride and then do a favor? It's an interesting concept. And we see this today in multinational. A lot of countries and companies are doing their best to maximize profits and destroying the environment. Well, if everyone profits and we ruin the environment, that's a social trap. But you can see that if we don't get all that we can, then maybe our competitors are going to get all they can right now. We're going to be left behind. So you can see it's really going to be a problem of kind of long-term versus short-term goals, and the concept of, should you compete or should you cooperate? Okay. That's a quick review of social psychology. I know we went really fast. We've got a couple more things to talk about today. The good news is we don't have any homework this weekend. Okay, don't worry. We're going to have plenty of practice. There's practice on AP Classroom on College Board's website. And Mrs. Fenton and I are going to pick it up next week with Prep Week. And we're going to try to have exam under testing conditions. But for right now, deep breath, no FRQ from me and Mrs. Fenton. But again, please join us on Monday for Prep Week. Don't forget, please email us some questions to ask Nancy and Joe about content. Okay, anything you want to know about psychology. We got a couple questions that people need a little more help with, this content or that content. About test tips, questions for Dr. Loftus, okay? Questions for Dr. Steele. Remember, Dr. Loftus, memory. Dr. Steele, stereotype threat. Dr. Duckworth is grit. Questions for the chief readers and Dr. Feinberg. Maybe you want to get a peek behind the curtain and what goes on in the College Board and in the reading. How are scores and tests made? Also, send pictures of your pets. There is Rudy and Max. Rudy is my golden retriever. Max is my black lab Rottweiler mix, and they genuinely actually like to lay on top of each other most of the time. So a lot of you have been sending your pics, and we'll get to some of them in a second. Remember to time yourself doing an FRQ, okay? And then email it or upload it somewhere. Get in the habit of working quickly, working efficiently, applying thoroughly. Then when you're done writing, send it somewhere. Okay. Now, if you want to really practice, I want you to go here to practice uploading just go to cb.org/apdemo. If you haven't gone to that website, please do so. College Board has set up a way for you to practice and walk through uploading stuff. It's got a timer there. Just give you a feel for it. Keep studying content and vocab. Do not walk into this test thinking, oh, it's open note, I don't have to study. I think we've talked about that. The more you know going into it, the better you're going to do. Quick walkthrough video. It might be worth your time to go to this tiny URL. It's a 4-minute video, give you an idea of what to expect coming your way May 19th. Okay, student emails. Aiden at Maurice McDonough High School in Maryland. And no, I didn't just pick this email because Aiden is in Maryland, but go Maryland. So Aiden has a question about binocular versus monocular, and Aiden included Luna. Right, so here's Luna. Binocular, by definition, means depth perception using two eyes. The main binocular depth clue is called retinal disparity. Disparity means difference. So here's the question. You've got two eyes, and I'm looking at myself. I should be looking at the camera. You have two eyes, and both of them are sending different signals to the brain. Why? Because they're about an inch or two apart. The brain is going to calculate, well, if the signal from the eyes is different, that thing is very close. And if you watch the video of me talking about depth perception, I urge you to go here. Close one eye, front of the hand, back of the hand, front of the hand, back of the hand. The difference between those two things is huge. You see a completely different picture. Front of the hand is completely different than back of the hand. And since they're so different, that means your hand is very close to your eyes. It's giving you a good idea of depth perception. Look across the room, close one eye, close the other. You really can't tell a difference. The difference in signal from something far away is small. So the further away, the smaller the disparity. The closer, the bigger the retinal disparity. Because you're using two eyes, that's binocular depth Q. Monocular depth Q, there's a list of them. And I urge you to open up your textbook or just Google that. That's pretty easy stuff to memorize. Mason and Martin Luther King High School, how many sleep stages? And that's a good question. Depending on the textbook you're using, the older textbooks had 4 non-REM. They had non-REM, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and REM. The newer textbooks have NREM 1, 2, 3, and REM. At this point in 2020, we want to shift towards the idea of 3 non-REM stages. They've combined the old stage 3 and stage 4. So I hope that makes sense. I think the College Board has updated their curriculum to reflect that. If you have a book that has 4 stages, that's okay. It's still a very good book. Psychology, the bulk of it has not changed, but there are some updates. So be aware that we're now working on 3 non-REM stages. Meredith at Lebanon High School wanted to kind of what I call game the system. It's like when I call an investment advisor, say, well, what's going to happen in the future? Where should I put my money? And people ask me, well, what should I study? And the short answer you're not going to want to hear is everything. The trend or pattern in important concepts, if we look historically, what's going to be asked, what vocabulary words are asked. I can't predict that. There's hundreds of vocabulary words, so unfortunately study all of them. Here's what I do know though. There's going to be 2 FRQs. One of them is going to be research-based. Okay, what is that going to mean? If you look at historically the research-based, how fluent are you in independent variable, dependent variable, confounding variable, ethical considerations, and can you analyze graphs? Okay, that would be my strong recommendation there. Those are kind of the trends. Is be very conversant in research topics. Sophia, and a shout out. She just wanted a shout out, but she had some advice or a question for some advice, and there is her dog Mango. Okay, here's my advice. And a lot of folks, a lot of kids have been emailing like, what do I do? I'm nervous. How do I prepare for this? And here's a horrible metaphor, but it works. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. It might sound ridiculous, but if you have a planner, if you have a calendar, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow? And I really do want you to start practicing step by step. If all you can handle today is going to the AP, the practice site, and just uploading something. Great. That's one small step. Maybe tomorrow do an FRQ, then do something different. What I want you to do is don't think of this huge thing on test day. Don't think of this huge test that you got to log in and answer this and answer that. You're going to get overwhelmed. Okay. All I want you to do is practice bits, to practice small things today, and eventually you'll build them together. Okay. So that's my advice. Don't get overwhelmed. You can do this. Okay. Thanks for watching. We hope you'll join us. Oh, you know what? I can't say we hope you'll join us again. Well, of course, we're going to have Monday, but the review's over, so I almost caught myself there. Thanks for watching. We hope you'll join us again. Be sure to complete the, can't even say that, can I, guys? We'll review the, oh, can't even say that. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope to see you guys metaphorically Monday. Mrs. Fenton will be there with us guest speakers, and we're going to have a live practice. Okay, thanks for watching.